Great. Welcome to the Personal Development Essentials podcast. Today I have the pleasure to be speaking with an exceptional individual who is a mind performance specialist, an international speaker, a consultant, and a coach, and one of the leading mind performance specialists. He helps frustrated entrepreneurs and business owners eliminate their fears to unlock their potential. So, Dean Fox, welcome to the Personal Development Essentials podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Aggie. Thank you very much for the invite.
It's really great to speak with you. I first met you, it was last week, wasn't it, at the Elite Network or the Evolve Network as it's called now.
That's correct, yes, in Chelmsford.
And you were giving a speech that I really resonated with. So I wanted to, bring you on the show and share some of those extraordinary things you said with the listeners here.
Okay, perfect.
Dean, I would like to start with you giving us a brief overview of who you are, or rather who you were, some kind of, your history, some your growth history, or some milestone moments in your life, so we can have an idea.
Okay, no problem. So as you heard when I spoke at Chelmsford, my story kind of it started when I was much younger, almost as a young kind of aspiring footballer. I had this I suppose this key moment, if you like, as a young person, where it was before a big game, and I was in a dressing room, and the coach kind of read out the team sheet beforehand. And having previously been, a leading goal scorer for the team, and I was certain I was going to be on the team sheet for this big game. And when he read the names out, I wasn't on it. And what that started for me, it was a pivotal moment. And there'd been other moments, but that was a pivotal moment in me kind of doubting my own, self-belief in terms of, well, am I really as good as I think I am? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't the only moment, but that kind of drove me to become this overachiever. I really wanted to be the best at everything that I did. And I was always striving to prove that, I was good enough, if you like. That led me on this purge. I didn't just want to be a gym. What happened was I had a period of life between 7 to really 4 years. And what had happened was I found myself in 2006, 2007 as the national sales manager for a company. I ran a team of people. From the outside, I looked like I had success. And it's one of the things I talk about a lot, about what success means. But from the outside world, people would say I had success. Alongside that, I'd started a property business with my wife. We'd had that for 3 or 4 years at the time, and things were going really well in that. So again, we looked like we had success. And then 2 things happened in quick succession. In 2007, I was made redundant from the company that I'd built myself to sales manager level. And so you start to, those self-doubts creep back in, and you start to think, well, okay, I knew I'd get found out. Maybe I wasn't destined for that. I wasn't good enough. And then obviously in 2008, we know what happened. And we had the biggest economic crisis that most of us have ever faced. And that virtually put paid to our property business overnight. And then two things happened after that. 2009, we'd taken some of the money that we'd made in the property and we'd invested it, trying to be smart, if you like, in terms of spreading our risk.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the company that we'd partnered with that were investigated and found to be acting fraudulently, and so that put paid to that side of the investment. And then in 2010, we suffered a really bad car accident. My wife and I were in a road traffic accident, which stopped us working for about 12 months after that. And
then it's one thing was happening after the other, like a spiral going downwards.
yes,
It's I've heard that kind of a situation before, when something happens and then something even worse and worse.
and you know, I often say that you can't connect the dots looking forward, but you can looking back. And looking back, that was absolutely a reflection of, you know, what I was going through personally.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, you know, all of the self-doubt was kicking in. I was feeling even worse myself. You know, that just led to other things happening. As it does, we're continually attracting the things into our life based on what we're thinking about and how we're feeling. And that for me was definitely prevalent in that period of time. And it reached, you know, a kind of a real pivotal point in the end of 2010, where I was probably in the worst position I'd ever been in personally. And I tell the story that I went out one morning I said to my wife I was going to get some fresh air, but I didn't really have any intention of coming home. I felt that, you know, the world would be a better place without me and all of those things. And that for me was a direct result of the way I was feeling. It was all about the doubt that I had about myself, that people were looking at me and what they were thinking about me, and that I wasn't good enough to do all the things that I'd hoped I could do. But that day was really important for me because two things happened that day. One was that on that walk, when I'd gone out, I suddenly realized that over all the things that had happened over the last 4 years, I was still there. And so I started to question myself from that basis as well, to say, well, you know, why now? You know, if I could have been killed in a car accident 12 months before, and there was other things that had happened, and it was like, well, so there must be something more to this then. Why am I still here? What's my purpose? And so I returned home with that thought in mind, that, okay, there must be something more. What am I missing? And I was looking for some inspiration, and I went into the office and took a book from the shelf that I'd read a number of times before that. It was bought for me by my son a few years earlier, which was Think and Grow Rich.
Mm-hmm.
And I read that book, and I often say to people that you don't see things in the book that weren't there before, but you see it with fresh eyes. You see it in a place that you weren't there before. And I couldn't put that book down. It completely changed the way I started to look at things. And that inspired me onto this journey of personal development, this idea that it's not about all the things that happened out there in the external world. It's more about what's going on with me. And if I want things to change, then I'm going to have to do something internally. I'm going to start looking within. So that started my journey into personal development. And a couple of things happened after that. I got involved in network marketing. That opened my eyes further to personal development, and I met some people along that journey. But I really made a commitment to invest in myself. And that not only led me to meet some of the best people I've ever met, but also I've been blessed to be able to be mentored by some of them. And I've been able to see some of the greatest coaches and speakers across the world as a result of that. But more importantly, what I started to do for me, I started to share with other people. And I think at Chelmsford, I talk about this often, that you get this kind of ripple effect.
Yes.
And you know, it started to have an impact in their lives. And that's what led me into doing speaking and coaching. It wasn't a plan. People talk about having a calling and things like that. I was also blessed to hear a speaker recently, I think it was Kavit Harrier, who talked about the fact that, you know, we don't get a calling. In other words, we don't find a purpose. The purpose finds us. that's kind of how I feel. If I feel like, I was always destined to do this in some way, shape or form, it just finally found me at a particular time.
Yeah. The best description of that resonates with me about purpose is that it's not somewhere waiting for us to discover it, as some people expect that the purpose is somewhere there waiting to be discovered. Rather than that, it needs to be created or composed like a song or a poem. It's not somewhere to be discovered. Dean, I wanted to ask you about that day that you went out, you said, without the intention of coming back, and then you started reading the book Think and Grow Rich again, and you got a different perception of personal development. So my question is, first, were you familiar with personal development before? Was there a specific shift that happened that day?
Yeah, so I was aware of it. I'd read a few books before that. So I'd read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I said I'd read Think and Grow Rich once or twice on the basis of a recommendation from various people. But I've always enjoyed reading, and I've always read what people might call inspirational books, or autobiographies from people who've had success. And I always all of the the things that I enjoy, all the films that I enjoy, all the actors that I enjoy, are all people who've got a story. I really like to connect with that. So I had an awareness of it. I just didn't really understand what it was.
Okay.
And what massively changed for me that day was I'd never really given it the power that it has. I'd never given it the credence that it can, what it can do for you and other people. I'd always seen it as something that you did alongside. I never saw it as something that could not only change my life but change other people's lives.
Yeah, I reached a similar realization not so long ago, when I realized that personal development is not just personal. I always assumed that it is personal, but it is that ripple effect. The more you grow, the more you can contribute
Absolutely.
to others.
Yeah. And I went through a period of people talk about self-development, and I have a joke sometimes. I talk about the idea that often people go through what I call shelf development. We've got bookshelves full of books, as you can see behind me, that are just bookshelves full of books, and we don't actually do anything with it. And so that was the other thing that massively changed for me, was that it's not just about reading and learning this information. You are actually supposed to take some action with the information that you've learned.
Yeah. To know and not to do is really not to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dean, I wanted to ask you about a topic that is you're very passionate about, and that's success. So you help others achieve it. I will be very careful how I phrase it now, because I want your definition, first of all, of what success is, because it's a very elusive term, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yeah. And so I use a definition, which is one of the best I've come across, which is from Earl Nightingale, which is that success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And I really like it for lots of reasons. But the biggest reason is that, first of all, it's progressive, because in my experience, both personally and with helping others, many people think that success is an end point. So I'll be successful when I have, or I'll be successful when I'm earning, or I'll be successful when I live here, or I own this home, or whatever that is. But that's the same for me. I've learned as well in terms of happiness. We attach all of these positive emotions, if you like, to external outcomes. So the idea for me that it was progressive, that it's not an end point, that you hear people talk, and sometimes I think it's said flippantly sometimes, and we don't pick it up enough, that it's all about the journey and not about the destination. But it's massively true. The whole idea of success is that it's about the journey. It's progressive, because usually you set a goal and achieve it. The first thing you do, set another one. So I'm all about the fact that it should be progressive. You should be moving towards whatever you've defined as being success for you. And that's the other thing, is that success for me is subjective. What success is for me might not be success for somebody else. And I think, I talk to Johnson, but I talk a lot about this idea that sometimes what happens is, we have a view of what success is, and then we have a view of what failure is. But actually, my success might be somebody else's failure. Um,
You talked about, remember the subjective part of success, that we see it through our own prism of our own, the way we perceive things. So something, exactly what you said, something that for me is great success, for you, for someone else might be failure, and vice versa.
yeah,
And you said that there is no clear differentiating line, and that was something that really made a big impression upon me from your speech, that there is no clear differentiating line between success and failure. There is no clear point when one turns to the other.
yeah. And because of that, I talk about the fact that actually the terms success and failure are largely irrelevant. They're just, they're the same scale. They're just different points for different people on the same scale. And that works for everything. So, when we talk about happy or sad, we talk about hot or cold, light or dark, black or white. There's no actual defining point that says at this point it's black and at this point it's white. There's a kind of line of variation between them, and that continues in everything. And so I talk a lot about this when I'm coaching people, because like you say, what success is for one person is not success for somebody else. And for some people, it's financial, it's monetary. For some people, it's not that at all. It's something completely different. It's how they live their life. Yes, it's subjective, and it's progressive. But the other thing about that statement for me about success is that he talks about a worthy ideal, and a lot of people read that and say, so it must be some sort of noble quest. It must be something that's something that's worthy, or that I'm worthy of. But for me, it's more the other way around. I think we look at it the wrong way. For me, it's about, well, success needs to be worthy of your time. So whatever the goal is, whatever it is you want to achieve, you're the one that's going to have to put the time in to get there. So make sure that what you set is worthy of that time. Because I think that, often we, based on our own limitations, we undersell ourselves. We often set goals that we inherently know are achievable, as opposed to stretching ourselves to somewhere that currently we might not think is possible.
Yeah, it's great to have a moonshot, a very high goal that maybe you can never achieve, but it serves as a beacon to draw you towards there. Because if I set a mediocre goal and I achieve it easily, I suppose that's what we were saying earlier about this wouldn't be success for me if I have the potential to do so much more. And many times we have to run the risk of going too far in order to realize how far we can go, isn't it? Like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that I think we don't do often as individuals, or often enough, is we don't give credit to where we've come from, to where we are, because we're always looking forward. And to a certain extent, I understand why we're doing that. And there's lots of quotes about, don't look back, you're not going that way. And I get what that's trying to achieve. But still, I think that we have to take stock sometimes. We have to give ourselves credit for what we've achieved.
To do this.
In order to be able to look forward and say, yeah, okay, I now see where I'm going and I see where I've come from.
Absolutely. And that those thoughts of self-doubt, I think most people suffer from them from time to time or constantly. So what's the way to get around that and move away from them?
Yeah, so my biggest, I've looked into lots of things. I studied a lot around, how the mind works, how we develop a self-image from a very young age, and how those things work. The thing that really resonated for me, two things, I suppose. One is that this idea that when we were born, there were unlimited possibilities for us, and we had infinite potential. So in essence, in terms of what we would like to have done, we were a 10 on a scale of 0 to 10, which is what I talk about, with 10 being the best version of ourselves. We were inherently perfect. We could do anything we wanted at that point. The problem is that from that point on, we then are conditioned in various ways, genetically and environmentally. And we build in all of those things. So the image that we have of ourselves, the self-doubt and those things, are created essentially by us based on our experiences and the things that we are exposed to, and the things that are said to us by what we call caretakers. So those in a position of responsibility, particularly when we're a very young age. So understanding that, and this is what really changed for me, is understanding that on an intellectual level. So saying, yeah, I know how that works, was one thing. But understanding it on a level of knowing, in terms of, okay, so I still am a 10, therefore, because nothing has changed for me apart from what I believe about myself.
Yes.
So I'm still exactly the same as I was the day I was born. And it led me to my coaching philosophy, which is that I don't ever believe I change people. Coaching, in my opinion, doesn't change people. What it does is it reveals who they truly are, because they've always been good enough to do all the things. I just want them to know that they can. And so that was my first kind of light bulb moment, if you like, around these limiting beliefs. And then the second thing for me is that as I've gone further into that, I've started to look more at, okay, so what's behind that? You know, the self-image. Lots of people talk about changing the image that you hold of yourself. And I've listened to lots of amazing speakers around the world, and coaches like Bob Proctor and people like that talk about, you know, the work that you need to do to change the self-image. But one of the things that often resonates with me, and I kept questioning over and over again, is, okay, so if that image is something that was an illusion, we effectively made that up based on the things that we interpreted. We couldn't know that for sure. We made a decision that we think that's what it was. If that's an illusion, why would we spend our time and invest our time working on improving something that doesn't exist in the first place? Even if it was to create a better version of that, it's still not real. And so my even bigger light bulb, if you like, was a real understanding that nobody, no thing, no event has the power to make me feel anything or make me believe anything unless I give it the power to do so. And that was what really changed everything for me. This real deep awareness that not only am I good enough, but I always was. And secondly, that I have ultimate power over everything. So just because something happens, somebody says something, or an event, you know, a circumstance comes out, that doesn't have the power to make me feel anything unless I give it the power to do so. And that's what changed for me.
It's a really beautiful way of thinking, and it's very spiritual, deeply spiritual, like this as well, that we are born with infinite possibilities and they are always there. We just accumulate stuff on top of that, which reminded me of that story with the golden Buddha that was covered in layers of clay to be protected, and then they forgot there is gold underneath.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and that's a great example. It's a great way of explaining to people that that's what it is. We build up an image on top of who we really are, which is based on who we think we are. And so I often say to people that it's not who you are that holds you back; it's who you think you are.
All right, that's great. Dean, I wanted to ask you, I want to go back to the book, the Think and Grow Rich, which you said you picked it up that day from your bookshelf, and you said that you have read it since that time many times. As a matter of fact, you read it every day. Is that what you said?
Yes.
You have it next to you.
It's on my desk. Yes.
So how many times have you read it?
I have no idea.
You've lost track.
Literally no idea. Yeah, I mean, what I don't do now is I probably don't read it, if you like, in order. I don't necessarily read chapter after chapter. What I tend to do, because it's on the desk, is I'll just either let it open, or I'll open it somewhere and I'll read a section.
Okay.
And you will see from my thing, it's got kind of lots of notes and scribbles in it. But despite the fact that I've read this lots, there are, you know, if I sat after this call and sat for an hour and read, I'd probably see something in there that I hadn't seen before. Because on an ongoing basis, we gain a new perspective. And when you hear things in maybe another audio or a book that you've read, or you hear someone speak, something in there will jump out based on what I've read recently or something I've heard that I probably didn't either understand or see before. And that's why I like to read things over and over again. So even if I'm reading any other books, I still try and read on that basis. So I do challenges from time to time where I'll pick a chapter from a book and I'll read the same chapter every day for 30 days.
Oh, really?
And the insight that you get from reading the same thing over and over again, just over that period of time, there's so many things that you see that you didn't see before, or you didn't realize, or you didn't have an awareness or an understanding of. And that was something I've been challenged by my coach or mentor a few times to do, particularly where I've been asking questions around a particular subject. And so they've recommended something and said, okay, well, just go and study that. And that's the other thing is sometimes when I talk about Think and Grow Rich, there's reading it and there's studying it, and they're two different things.
Especially with a book like that, it has many layers of knowledge that, as you said, the more conscious you become, the more deeper inside the meanings you go. Actually, I wanted to ask you about one of the chapters in that book, because and that's from personal interest, because I'm looking for some answers myself, and it is probably the shortest chapter in the book that describes the path to riches, and that's the mystery of sex transmutation. So can you just explain simply what is that all about? How do you perceive that as a way to achieve what we want in our life?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it is a chapter, I think, that when you first read the book, and it was the same for me when I first read it, I kept thinking, why is that in there? I don't understand how that links to what he's trying to. Everything else I see why it's there. I just don't understand that. But what I've learned, and this is something I spoke about at Chelmsford, and I speak about it a lot, is that people talk about motivation, and lots of times in Think and Grow Rich, he's talking about the key things around persistence and the idea that you've got to keep going because you don't know how long things are going to take to come to fruition, and that the universe will reward you in the end. And people often talk about motivation in the same way, that you need to stay motivated for long enough to achieve the success. But I have a thing about motivation, because for me, if you need to be motivated to do something, then you're not doing something that you love or enjoy. You're being forced to do something, because if you love or enjoy something, you don't need to be motivated to do it. You'll go out and do it anyway.
Absolutely.
And what I started to understand from that particular chapter around sex transmutation is that if you think about, for me, if I think back to things like when you fall in love with somebody, I don't need to be motivated every day to think of that person, or to want to spend time with them, or to be attracted to them. And again, the sexual energy, if you like, associated with that, I didn't need to force any of that. That was inside me, and it happens, and it drives you. People will do the most amazing things for love, and so what I take from it is that what he's trying, in my opinion, what he's trying to get across is that if you transfer that amount of passion and energy into what it is that you truly want, if you could use that in the same way, then you'd have the same results. And for me, that's kind of the biggest point from it, is that for me, he's looking at, you think about, again, if we went back to the kind of, if you like, the spiritual aspect of us, if you look at us as individuals, love is one of our key, peace, love, and joy are within us. They're our key drivers, if you like. So he's talking about, in my opinion, using the inert energy that we have and directing it towards what it is that you really want in your life.
Okay.
So when he talks about setting a goal and a definite major purpose and having a vision for what that should be, he talks about holding that vision. He talks about being persistent to move towards it. All of the steps are geared around starting with that, holding it in your mind for long enough, and keep going until it happens. For me, the only way you can do that is to same sort of energy you would when you fell in
Okay.
love with someone.
The way I understand it, though, because that's what you say is great and makes sense, but how do you take that or transmute it, as he says, that feeling, that passion of that you have when you're in love, into other things? My understanding is that it has to do somehow with either temperance, sexual. I don't know. Is it abstinence? I don't. That's what I. It's very unclear in the book because he says sex transmutation and not love or desire or anything else. So he talks about the sex, and actually I remember he says that if many people have no idea of how powerful it is, and instead of letting the sex urge or the sexual desire to drive them into becoming geniuses, instead they use it in a way that takes them to the status of the lower animals. So that's what I'm still unsure about. What does he mean about the actual sexual urge or desire? How do you transmute that?
And I think, again, this is, in my opinion, he talks several times in the book when he talks about desire, and in the first chapter as well, he talks about having a not just a want or a need, but a white hot burning desire is the way he talks about having it. And for me, that's essentially what he's referring to. This kind of, not just I enjoy what I do, or I'm passionate about this business, but you have a white hot burning desire that you take the same energy and you drive that into whatever it is that you want. And again, it goes back to the point for me is that I said at the beginning that I don't think we find a purpose. I think it claims us, it finds us. And for me, that's the same, because once you've found it, that energy is almost automatic. I don't need to be, motivated or driven or asked effectively, to go and speak somewhere, or to go and share some value, or to come on a podcast like this. I have a white hot burning desire to do it as many times as I possibly can. It doesn't make any difference to me. Yes. And for me, that's where that goes. That's where he's trying to get people to shift, in terms of, well, you can use the same information and you can either do this with it or you can do this with it. And so, if you're reading this book, and he says it himself, if you're reading this book with the idea of attaining richness, and he talks about riches being whatever they are, he refers to them in monetary terms a lot in Think and Grow Rich. But, for me, that's more about the time frame the book was written, during a recession, if you like, a depression, when most people, that was what they were looking for. But for me, riches is whatever it is. It's not the same as success. It's subjective.
Exactly. Yes. That's great. Thank you. You give me a different perspective on how to look into that, especially with that linking into the first chapter, the burning desires. Let me ask something different, some quick fire questions, Tin.
Okay.
If you could run into your teenage self and be able to teach them something that potentially could change his life forever, what would that be?
It's a really interesting question. It's one I've been asked on occasions, in several different ways. Okay. My answer is twofold. So first of all, if I was to run into my own self as a teenager, I wouldn't tell them anything, because without that, I wouldn't be who I am and where I am today. So I wouldn't want to change anything that happened, because it's led me to this point.
Okay.
That said, if I could pass the knowledge that I have now onto other people at a younger age, then I would happily do. And I do talk often at schools and things like that. But one of the key things for me, if I could pass on anything, is this awareness that, you are a 10.
All right.
You're ultimately good enough. Whatever it is that you want, go out in the world and find a way to have it, because it's eminently possible.
It's very empowering to have this kind of belief, because having the information on its own, it's very nice to listen to that, but unless you instill it as your belief, you can't really do much about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Continuation then of the question. Let's say you could change something in the world as it is today with a magic wand. What would that be? Or would you, for the same reason, you wouldn't change anything?
Yeah, I suppose, one of the answers would be I wouldn't change anything, because everyone is in a position where they should be based on what's happening to them in their lives. But again, I suppose if I could give everybody the same awareness, it would be based around the same thing. It would be based around the fact that, well, particularly on a global scale, it would be that nothing that's happening externally has any bearing on you as an individual. By you, I mean the real you, the true self, not the body or the self-image. And I think if more people understood that, and we came from our true self, which effectively only has peace, love, and joy, I think the world would be a slightly different place. I think too often we're coming from a self-image or an ego point of view, and that's why we have some of the things that we have happening, unfortunately.
That's an understatement, indeed. Yes. Okay. So, then what's the biggest mistake, if you want to share, that you've made the last 12 months that you could share for people to avoid?
Okay. I think, well, two. I've got two. One from a business point of view for any business owner, and the second from a personal and a coaching point of view. So the first one from a business point of view is don't try and think you have to know all the steps in the process and how to do all of those steps yourself. So I spent a lot of time thinking I needed to understand a whole host of things around my business that I actually don't need to know. And so I've, looking back, although I always say time is not wasted, because it brought you to that decision. But if I could have changed something in 12 months, it would have been a recognition of that early. So if you're in business, one of the things is recognize as early as you possibly can what things you are good at and what things you enjoy doing and what things bring value and revenue to your business, and find someone else to do everything else. That's my business mistake, if you like.
Yes.
My personal one is that it comes from being open-minded, but open-minded to a point that you will consider any alternative possibility or solution. And what I mean by that is, for example, that over the last, maybe a little bit longer than 12 months, but if someone had said to me, say 2 years ago, in terms of your personal development journey, I think that you need to spend more time looking at the spiritual aspects of personal development, I would probably have pushed them away and said, that's not where I want to go. That's an area I don't want to delve into. And I was probably too closed-minded at that time. What's actually happened, and not by any specific plan, is that that's where I've ended up. More and more of my own self-inquiry and my own research and my own development is in that area. It is in what lies behind the mind, who's the thinker of the thoughts, all of those sorts of things, as opposed to, the outer self-image stuff, the body and the results in the world, if you like. So my mistake, if you like, was, particularly in a personal development and growth world, is don't dismiss any aspect of personal development. Be open-minded to it all, and take from it what you need at that given point in time.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So similar then to that question, what has made the biggest impact over the last 12 months, either in business or in personal life, that you would like to share?
Okay, I think both of those for me, so the opposite of that. So the thing that's made the biggest impact in the business is a recognition that I don't need to be everything myself. So find some partners, find some outsourced people, whatever it is. Do the things that you really want to do and you're good at, and find a way around all the other stuff. And that's made a huge difference in my business, because it's given me time to do things like this or go and speak, or whereas before I would have been saying, well, I've got, I don't know, I've got a website to build, or I've got a sales funnel to understand, or whatever it is, which is not what I enjoy doing. And that's made a difference, both in my time and also in terms of how I enjoy what I do. And the second thing is that, in reverse of having this open mind, that having gone down that route, having my research having led me in there, and the more I've inquired myself to look at things like meditation and stuff like that I didn't do 2 years ago. I've also had a huge made a difference on me personally. And it's, I suppose, deepening that awareness, but my awareness of who I am, my awareness of the fact that I am a 10 and I'm able to do whatever it is that I want to do. And also my awareness that, all the information I ever need already exists. I just need to locate it and tap into it and become aware of it. All of that has had massive changes. And that doesn't mean to say that, we've made quantum leaps in revenue or anything like that. But just for me to be in a place where I know that anytime I generate some sort of emotion, to have an awareness to be able to question what's causing that, and is that serving me or not, is huge, because it gives you a whole different perspective and a shift on a day-to-day basis in terms of whether you allow something to have an impact or not.
Absolutely. We can't master ourselves if we can't master our emotions first. Yeah. Then talk to us about your coaching business, and I understand that you're organizing an event.
Yes.
Soon.
Yes. So, like I said, my coaching business, I tend to work with, I can work with a wide group of people. So I've worked in the past with, professional sports people, entrepreneurs, business owners, and I still do some work with them. But I've tended more recently to be working with coaches, speakers, consultants, experts, for two reasons. One is that I think that they are being on the same journey as I have. And so there's lots of value that I can add in terms of shortening their journey and their path. Both in terms of this idea of, what you need to know and what you don't need to know, and finding systems and people to do the things you don't need to do. But also defining some of the things I think are key for people in those industries early on in their business. So what is it they want their life to look like, and making sure their business strategy is designed around that rather than the other way around. So some of those key things. And then working with people on that next step, if you like. So deepening their awareness from personal development to this idea of knowing exactly who you are. And I use the word knowing not lightly, because I think there's a difference between an intellectual awareness of this and actually knowing it. So feeling it on a deep enough level that I just know who I am, and I just know that the universe will provide and guide me to wherever I need to be at any given point. And so that 2-day event that you mentioned, that's a 2-day event in October on the 12th and 13th, and that's designed specifically as a self-inquiry event. So it's not going to be like a traditional personal development event. It's not going to be multiple speakers. It's not going to be me and a fellow coach coaching people for 2 days. It's more, we're going to learn as much as the people who attend are going to learn. So it's more about us as a group of people asking some questions and delving internally for some answers and growing together over 2 days around what's actually behind the mind. So who's the thinker of the thoughts is the idea of that 2-day event, with a view that people will hopefully leave with what I've spent the last 2 and a bit years trying to get my head around and understand. And my fellow coach at the time, he's one of my mentors, he spent a lot longer, and we've spent some time trying to understand how we can best help people understand that in a shorter space. And if people can get that in that period of time, I just believe that the transformations that will happen from that will be huge.
So, what kind of techniques or tools you use to help people look inside themselves and find their core being? Is it meditation? Is it things like that?
So yeah, I'm not a big fan, to be honest, of the words tools and techniques, because if
Okay.
my view for that, this is just my own opinion now, my own coaching style, is that if you're giving people tools and techniques, then they're all coping strategies. They're ways of people dealing with something that's causing them an effect. I've preferred to focus on what's the core problem, where did that come from, how, if that's the case, how sure are we that's 100% true?
Okay.
Because, like I said, most of what we believe, most of what we've grown up learning about ourselves is effectively an illusion. It's things that we believed happened, or that we convinced ourselves an understanding of a particular point, an interpretation of an event. The event happened, but the interpretation wasn't the only interpretation. There could have been several others, but we chose that one. And so for me, it's all about self-inquiry. It's about helping them, asking them the relevant questions that get them to think about, yeah, that's entirely true. That didn't actually happen that way, or that my interpretation of that event isn't the only interpretation. And if it's not the only one, then the one I chose isn't the truth.
Thank you. So would that be something like guiding their self-reflection?
Yeah, essentially,
Okay.
yeah. It's just about, for me, it comes from, and I often say to people when they say, I coached someone and then they say, I did this and I've changed and this has happened. And I often say, just remember, I didn't do anything. You did everything. All I did, I just act as a guide. I just ask some questions and I get you to think about what that really means. And is it true? And often, it doesn't take very long for people to realize that it isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the facilitating that the
Yeah,
change
absolutely.
in people. Yeah,
Yeah.
no one can change anyone else. It's just they can only help them to find the transformation within themselves.
Yeah. And like I said, at the beginning, that for me, my coaching philosophy is all around revealing. So a bit like you talked about the golden Buddha, my job is to help them, not me, but help them strip away those layers. So they reveal their golden Buddha, who they really are inside. And to see people do that allows them to go on and achieve amazing things in what they would probably perceive to be virtually impossible timescales. But it's because they're now free, if you like, to be who they've always wanted to be.
Just for some reason, I just remembered one of those things that again on your speech last week made a big impact. You said something about success, that everyone is 6 inches away from success, the 6 inches between their ears, and that was so much. If you think about it, it's so true, because that's
Yeah,
our biggest ally and our worst enemy.
absolutely. Yeah, I often talk. I did this morning at a network meeting that it's for me it's the most underutilized asset in any business or any individual for that matter.
The mind, the
The
mindset.
mind. Yeah. And the reason that we're held back is 99 times out of 100. In fact, it's 100% of the time. It's just most people don't believe that. Is that it's in here. That's what we're making our decisions based on.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about the fact that most business owners, if you ask them, wouldn't take business advice from a 5-year-old. And yet most of us do that on a daily basis. We self-reflect on our 5-year-old self, which is when our beliefs were developed, and we take advice from our inner self based on that. And yet you wouldn't do that in the real world.
It's great when you think of it like that.
Yeah.
Great. Dean, it's a very enjoyable conversation. I'm aware of time, so I will start wrapping it up slowly. I wanted to ask whether there is any question that you were hoping that I would ask, and I completely missed it.
Was there any question I was hoping you would ask? I don't think there was. No.
Okay.
No, no, there definitely wasn't.
Okay, just in case you wanted to share something that we didn't have a chance to talk about today in our short conversation.
No, I think, for me, it's always about those key points. If I think if everybody understood there were always a 10,
Mm-hmm.
if everybody understood that they don't need to spend time developing a new self-image because the old one's an illusion anyway, and if everybody came from their true self position of peace, love, and joy, then the personal development world would end. The industry would end tomorrow, effectively, if we all came from that space. But I think the more people that we can help to see that, then the bigger impact we can have in the world.
I truly and honestly believe that there is a global race in awareness or consciousness of humanity, and people that talk about personal development, they want the increase in the collective growth, are getting more and more, and with the modern technology, so much easier now to spread this information instantly around the globe. So I think it's only a matter of time before we reach a critical mass, and the message is going to be heard. It's going to be
Yes.
too loud to be ignored, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Dean, how can people connect with you?
So the best way to connect with me is through my social media channels. So I'm on Facebook and on Instagram. They're both the same. So at Dean Fox Coaching is in either of them. Or if they want to drop me an email, they can get me at dean@deanafox.com.
Okay, I'll put all the links on the show notes. Dean, I want to thank you very much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with myself and all the listeners. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and I appreciate being invited as one of your guests. It's always a pleasure to speak to people and share some information, and hopefully get some value from it. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Dean.
No problem.
Thank you.
Take care, Aggie.
Thank